2023 is a big test for McLaren as the team that has previously impressed the most in F1's midfield aims to recover from a disappointing backwards step. And though it may be better than 2022, the likelihood is that McLaren has to play the waiting game to make major progress. Various issues have placed a limitation on how good McLaren's 2023 car can be, and though some were previously known, others were only discovered last year. While we get into that, let us know in the comments what you think is possible for McLaren this season. And if you don't like the idea of McLaren struggling, but you do at least enjoy what we're doing, we'd really appreciate a quick show of support by hitting the thumbs up button and subscribing to our channel if you haven't already. Plus, you can turn on notifications if you want to be alerted about any new videos we release in the future. Instead of using the new technical regulations to chip away further at the gap to F1's three biggest teams in 2022, McLaren fell to 5th in the championship behind Alpine. The competitiveness of its car was a key part of this, regardless of Daniel Ricciardo's specific problems on one side of the garage, and McLaren knew it had short and medium-term issues from the very start of the year. The brake reliability woe in Bahrain was most obviously problematic in how it put the team on the back foot in preparing for the season in testing and made for a miserable opening race as well. But McLaren felt the consequences of this for long afterwards, as it struggled to balance the resources required to address the problem alongside the performance development of the car, delaying the progress it could make in season. And on top of this, outgoing team boss Andreas Seidl even admitted at the end of the year that it probably had an impact on the development of the 2023 car as well, because McLaren couldn't start that work as early as it would have liked to. Linked to that is a weakness within the team in terms of how it's set up that only became apparent because of these problems. McLaren realised it misjudged the configuration of its team during the 2 seasons adhering to the budget cap and lacked engineering capacity. McLaren was one of the biggest advocates for F1 committing to an even stricter cost cap than was planned when the first ever financial regulations were introduced for 2021. While it was not on the level of Mercedes, Ferrari and Red Bull, McLaren was one of F1's biggest spenders, and this, combined with wider McLaren Group company issues, meant it had to make members of its racing division redundant during 2020 in anticipation of the coming cap. The upshot is that in the first half of 2022, it became obvious to McLaren it simply didn't have enough engineering resources available to develop the car in parallel with the 2023 project. The good news for McLaren is this was at least recognised, and an effort was made to ensure that in the final months of 2022, it could start recruiting dozens of extra personnel. All teams have found more efficient ways to work after getting used to operating in the budget cap era, and McLaren's own effort in this regard has allowed it to free up the money to increase its engineering headcount. This was a collaborative effort between the financial department and the leadership trio of Seidl, technical director James Key, and racing director Andreas Stella, who has since replaced Seidl as team principal. While the headcount increase came too late to protect McLaren from the initial compromises of its work for 2023, it should at least make McLaren's in-season development more productive this year. McLaren's engineering recruitment drive effectively acknowledges that it could have done better as an organisation in 2022 and means its 2023 car started life on the back foot. That's far from ideal, given there is an ongoing infrastructure weakness that contributed to the problems of the MCL36 and will inevitably impact the quality of the work on the 2023 car as well. One of the first priorities identified by Seidl and Key upon their arrivals at McLaren in early 2019 was getting the board to sign off on a new wind tunnel and driver simulator, because the Toyota wind tunnel it currently uses isn't quite as good as its rivals. But the COVID-19 pandemic interrupted the building of these major items, initially by a few months, but then by even more. As we mentioned earlier, the issues faced by the wider McLaren Group meant it had to navigate a significant amount of financial pressure in 2020, and the F1 team's capital expenditure projects had to be paused. The suggestion from Seidl and Key in late 2022 was that the wind tunnel and simulator fell even further behind schedule than was initially outlined. McLaren's original timeline was that the new tunnel would take 2 years to build, indicating it may be ready sometime in 2021, but then it was talked about being finished in 2022. It will finally be completed by late 2023 after progressing full steam ahead last year. So the first McLaren to really benefit from this will be the 2024 car, but even then there will be a limit to its value because Key says there is a plan associated with how the new wind tunnel and simulator will effectively be phased in across multiple cars. The flaws of the 2022 McLaren have only reiterated just how much the team needs this new infrastructure. The MCR36 was hardly irredeemable, and there was success in broadening its working window and making it more consistent. But it was draggy, tended to be exposed in traction zones during higher ambient temperatures early in the season, and the car didn't gel that well with the new 18-inch wheels, which created some peculiar handling traits that both drivers took issue with. While McLaren knew it would be limited with how good its car would be because of the current wind tunnel limitations, there were also some problems that it simply didn't envisage. This has led Key to ponder whether there is basically a blind spot in the wind tunnel in which the last few McLarens have been conceived, causing it to miss things in the design process. As the same tunnel is being used for the 2023 car, McLaren's hands are tied to some degree, but the silver lining is that it shows why it was so important that McLaren could at least make good progress with the new infrastructure projects last year. While there's nothing McLaren can really do about the tools it has for 2023, any further delays to the new facilities would have impacted several future cars as well. There's no arguing that as a team, McLaren underdelivered and didn't achieve its goals in 2022. Every major metric for judging McLaren was down compared to the previous year. No wins, no poles, only one podium instead of 5, and a huge slump in points to 159. That was even worse than McLaren managed in the shorter COVID-hit 2020 season and barely any better than its 2019 tally. But the good thing is the big weaknesses have been recognised, and there were some positives last year as well. The big cause for optimism is the one area McLaren looked like a front-running team, and in which it actually finished high up in an unofficial set of F1 standings, the pit stop rankings. It was not too long ago that McLaren toiled in this area, and operationally it was one of the main priorities in the early months of Seidel's leadership, under the focus of Stella, who was in charge of this kind of activity initially as performance director and then racing director. Stella highlights the speed and consistency of McLaren's pit stops in 2022 as a clear example of its progress as a racing team, and it's easy to see why. He reckons McLaren is now among the top 3 teams for pit stops and can match the very best in F1 within a year, with more practice and improvement. Meanwhile, DHL, which monitors all pit stops and runs a competition tracking each team's performance for F1, claims that McLaren made more progress with its average pit stop time than any other team in 2022 and had it as a clear second best over the course of the season, behind only Red Bull. McLaren even managed something that would have been unthinkable for the team a couple of years ago, a 1.98 second pit stop in Mexico, which was also the only time all year that a team achieved a sub 2 second stop. While Stella still believes there is more work to do on pit stops and other operational matters like race strategy, McLaren has made tangible progress towards being a leading race team again, even if the overall results suggest it is flatlining as an organisation. One thing that may be said for senior McLaren personnel in recent years is that they've always been realistic about the team's progress and the timeline to fight for wins again, and not tried to hide the shortcomings in the meantime. So they've earned the benefit of the doubt, and when they say there were important lessons in 2022, we can probably believe them and be confident that McLaren is actually capable of addressing its weaknesses eventually. Some of these are more baked in than others though, and even if there is still long-term optimism around McLaren's prospects, realistically there's a limit to how much progress is possible this year.